What if the divine wasn't somewhere out there in the sky, but inside you? Not as we've been told, not in the stained glass image, passed down through centuries. Not in the shape of an old man watching from the clouds, but something far more elusive, more enigmatic, more intimately entwined with your very existence. What if God was not separate from you, but a whisper within your thoughts, a fire flickering in the depths of your dreams, a mystery breathing in your moments of awe and silence? Not the God of thunderbolts and commandments, but a presence hidden in your questions, in your longings, in the aching spaces of your soul that words can't touch. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and philosopher of the soul, dared to ask that forbidden question. He ventured not into churches or monasteries, but into the quiet, haunted corridors of the human psyche. He believed that if divinity existed, its first temple was the mind. Its first scripture was the dream. Jung didn't seek God in doctrine or ritual. He found him more something like him. In the spontaneous art of the unconscious, in the shadows cast by the soul itself. He saw that our dreams speak in the language of symbols, and that those symbols, mysterious, timeless, universal, are not random. They are messages, clues, echoes of something ancient, something sacred. He looked where few dared to look, deep into the abyss of the human condition, where myths rise like fog from the ground of being, and where the divine reveals itself not as dogma, but as paradox. To Jung, the divine was not a belief, it was an experience, a phenomenon that arises uninvited from within the human heart, as real as any storm, as undeniable as grief, as transformative as love. He asked not, "Do you believe in God?" but something more subversive, something infinitely more personal. What if God is not a being we worship, but a mystery we become aware of through inner confrontation? What if God is not out there waiting to be found, but a living image that emerges from the soul, when we are brave enough to meet ourselves? Fully, truthfully, painfully. This question doesn't just stretch theology, it shakes it. It cracks open the rigid walls of religious certainty, and it forces science to look inward, to admit that the inner world may hold truths just as profound as the outer. If the divine is something within us, if it arises from the human psyche, then the age-old question shifts. Are we discovering God, or are we creating him? Or, more provocatively, is there even a difference? Because in Jung's world, the psyche is not just a bundle of thoughts and memories, it is a sacred landscape, a mythological theater, a mirror reflecting both our madness and our potential for transcendence. Throughout history, humanity has lifted its eyes to the sky, seeking salvation in the stars, answers in the heavens. But Jung looked in the opposite direction. He closed his eyes. He listened to the voice within. He followed the thread of the unconscious, where the dream world blurs the boundary between the sacred and the profane. What if the divine isn't above, but within? What if the voice of God is the same voice that speaks to us in dreams, that cries out in our suffering, that urges us toward healing, toward becoming whole? Could it be that the idea of God is not merely a symbol of a higher being, but a symbol of the highest possibility within ourselves? The part of us that refuses to give up, the part that seeks meaning in chaos, the part that dares to hope, even in despair, the part that longs deeply wildly for connection, truth, and transformation. Perhaps we are all carrying a sacred space inside us, a hidden temple, not made of marble or stained glass, but shaped by pain and resilience, by mystery and myth. Maybe that's where the real altar lies. In the places we don't want to go, in the grief we avoid, in the questions we can't answer, in the shadow we fear, but must face. In this video, we will journey into the heart of Carl Jung's extraordinary vision of the divine. A vision where God is not a doctrine to be defended, but a living presence to be encountered, a symbol not of external control, but of inner wholeness. We will explore how Jung reframed the idea of God as something psychological, yes, but also something deeply real. Because to him, the psyche was not less than reality. It was reality, from the inside out. We'll explore questions that border on heresy, on mysticism, on genius. We'll challenge the lines that separate religion from psychology, science from spirit, the mind from the soul. Is God an archetype? A pattern that lives in the collective unconscious of every human being? Is he a symbol of the self, the highest version of who we are meant to become, if we dare to integrate our shadow, our wounds, our light? Or is God something even more mysterious? Something that cannot be named, but only lived? Hold on. Because this isn't a journey for the faint of heart. This is not about answers. It's about transformation. It's about consciousness. It's about the human soul's search for wholeness. This is, according to Jung, is God hidden in human consciousness? Part 1. God as Archetype. Carl Jung proposed a revolutionary idea, that what we call God is not merely a supernatural entity, but an archetype, a primordial image, a structure rooted in the deepest layers of the human psyche. This idea does not make God less real. On the contrary, it grounds the divine in human experience. It means God is not confined to religion. He is found in dreams, in stories, in art, in silence, in suffering. To Jung, archetypes are not human inventions. They are discovered. Like ancient fossils buried in the soul. They are the building blocks of meaning. Blueprints etched into the collective unconscious. Appearing in every culture, every time period, because they are part of what it means to be human. The archetype of the mother, the wise old man, the hero's journey, and yes, the divine being. These archetypes are not mere metaphors. They are alive within us. They shape how we see, how we feel, how we dream. So when someone dreams of a radiant figure wrapped in light, or feels overwhelmed by awe in nature, or senses a sacred presence in solitude, Jung would not ask, "Did this really happen?" He would ask, "What truth is the psyche trying to reveal?" Because in Jung's view, the unconscious is not just a repository of repressed thoughts, it is a source of wisdom. It is the language of the soul, speaking through images, symbols, and emotion. God, for Jung, was not proven through logic. He was felt. He was experienced. He was the symbol of totality, of unity between opposites, of the reconciliation of the conscious and unconscious mind. The divine was not a judge, but a mirror reflecting back to us everything we are, everything we hide, and everything we could become. To Jung, encountering God meant encountering the self, the whole self, the union of light and shadow, ego and soul, wound and wisdom. And that is why, for Jung, the search for God is not separate from the search for meaning. It is the same journey, and it begins within. Part 2. The Self and the Divine. In Jung's view, there is a profound and mysterious connection between the idea of God and what he called the self. This wasn't a casual metaphor or poetic flourish, it was a central pillar of his psychology. Not the ego, the surface level I that wants, desires, identifies with labels, and chases validation. Not the ego that clings to control or constructs a tidy narrative about who we think we are. But the self, something vastly deeper. The self is the totality of the psyche, encompassing both the conscious and the unconscious. It is the wholeness that holds within it all our parts. The light, the dark, the known and the unknown, the remembered and the forgotten. The self is not an identity. It is not a role, or a mask, or a personality. It is who you are beneath all that. It is the untouched core of your being, the eternal ground beneath the shifting sands of your experiences. And this is where Jung's insight becomes not just psychological, but spiritual. To Jung, the image of God is the image of the self. Not the ego's fantasy of being godlike. Not the inflated narcissistic sense of superiority that sometimes masquerades as spirituality, but rather, a symbolic mirror of wholeness, a representation of the complete human being, integrated and united in its opposites. He wrote, "The experience of the self is always a defeat for the ego." And that sentence alone contains volumes of truth, because the journey toward the self is not an easy one. It is not a journey that flatters the ego or reinforces its illusions. To encounter the divine within is not comforting. It's devastating. It doesn't validate who you think you are, it shatters it. It breaks you. It breaks the false identities, the lies we tell ourselves, the borrowed beliefs we carry without question. It humbles you. It forces you to bow before something larger than your plans, your intellect, your achievements. It demands transformation. And transformation, by its nature, is painful. It is a death and a rebirth. It requires you to let go of the familiar and step into the mystery. Think of the biblical story of Jacob wrestling the angel. He doesn't win a blessing through surrender, but through struggle, through a night of turmoil and confrontation with something otherworldly. Or the story of the Buddha under the Bodhi tree, battling illusions, temptations, and inner demons, not with violence, but with stillness and unwavering presence. Or Jesus in the wilderness, facing the deepest temptations of power, ego, and fear, facing himself in the silence where only God can speak. These are not tales of finding God in peace and safety. They are stories of initiation of descent, before ascent. To truly meet the divine, Jung suggested, is to face the shadow, to plunge into the depths of the unconscious, to open the door to everything you've avoided, denied, or repressed. Because that's where the self lives. Not in the clear light of day, but in the mystery of night. And if the encounter with the divine is real, it will not inflate you. It will not make you feel righteous or superior. It will not leave you untouched. It will make you feel small, and yet paradoxically whole. It will strip you down to your essence, and in that nakedness, you will begin to see perhaps for the first time who you really are. Part 3. Dreams and Divine Symbols. If God is hidden in the unconscious, if the divine dwells in the unseen parts of the psyche, then dreams are one of the languages he uses to speak to us. For Jung, dreams were never meaningless. He rejected the modern idea that dreams are simply random firings of a sleeping brain. To him, dreams were sacred messages from the self to the ego. They were not distractions from life, but invitations into it. Night after night, the psyche whispers, and if we listen, we can begin to decode the language of symbols that have been with us for millennia. In dream after dream, religious imagery appeared: crosses, mandalas, divine figures, sacred mountains, cosmic battles, apocalyptic visions that mirrored the great myths. Jung found that even people with no religious training, no spiritual background, would still dream in patterns that mirrored the world's ancient myths. Why? Because Jung argued, the psyche is inherently symbolic. It doesn't speak in logic or literalism. It speaks in images, in stories, in archetypes. It speaks through the language of the soul. And when the soul is hungry for meaning, when it seeks wholeness, the image of God often appears not as doctrine, but as a symbol. As light in the darkness, as king or queen, mother or father, as fire, as the ocean, as the great eye in the sky. These symbols don't point to one literal being, they point to the deep human longing for purpose, unity, and transcendence. In one of his most famous cases, Jung treated a man who had distanced himself from religion. He hadn't been to church in years, had no interest in theology. Yet, he dreamt of being judged by a great, all-seeing eye in the sky. At first glance, the dream seemed frightening, a kind of divine punishment, but Jung looked deeper. He saw it not as condemnation, but as calling. The psyche was reaching out, demanding attention. It was calling the man to confront something larger than his limited ego. Not a god outside of him, but the sacred self within. It was urging him to wake up to the deeper layers of his own being. Dreams, in this view, are not just private nonsense. They are holy messengers. They are the quiet voice of the divine, trying to guide us home. And when we begin to take them seriously, not with superstition, but with reverence, we open ourselves to transformation. Because in the symbols of dreams, we don't just see fragments of our lives. We see the outline of the sacred. We glimpse the eternal. We catch the echo of the divine whispering. Become who you are. Part 4. Psychological V's, Religious Truth. Here's a question that often arises, usually with a touch of skepticism, a raised eyebrow, or even a challenge. If God is just a symbol, doesn't that mean he's not real? It's a fair question, and one that strikes at the heart of faith, psychology, and the human longing for meaning. But Carl Jung, with his unique brilliance and spiritual depth, wouldn't dismiss the question. He'd pause, he'd reflect, then he'd likely say, that depends. What do you mean by real? In our modern scientifically driven world, we are conditioned to believe that only what can be weighed, measured, seen, or touched, counts as real. Reality, we are told, must be observable, quantifiable, something that can fit into a lab report, or be charted on a spreadsheet. But Jung saw through this illusion of limitation. He understood that the most important aspects of human existence, love, hope, grief, joy, awe, and purpose, cannot be dissected in a laboratory. No microscope can reveal the ache of a broken heart. No algorithm can measure the soul's hunger for transcendence. No scientific formula can capture the mysterious, overwhelming presence that floods the room during a moment of prayer, silence, or surrender. For Jung, psychological reality, the inner world of images, symbols, archetypes, and emotions, was just as real, and often more impactful, than the outer world of physical matter. A symbol that awakens your soul, that breaks open your ego, that draws you toward healing and transformation, that is real. An image that appears in a dream, and stirs something ancient and sacred within you, that is real. A voice that comes not from your ears, but from the deepest chambers of your being, whispering truth or calling you to courage that is real. So when someone has a vision of God, or is overcome with tears during worship, or feels a sacred presence while standing before a sunset, or holding a child, Jung does not scoff or try to reduce the experience to neurons firing in the brain. He does not ask, "Did this happen in physical space?" He asks instead, "What does it mean for this person's journey toward wholeness? What truth is being revealed through this experience?" This is not about denying faith. It is about seeing faith from a deeper vantage point, not as a set of dogmas, but as a living, breathing encounter with the mystery of existence. For Jung, psychology does not kill God. It does not reduce the divine to fantasy. Instead, it shows us where the sacred has always been quietly residing. Not just in the heavens, but in the human soul. In the images that rise from the unconscious. In the stories we tell. In the longings we carry. In the wounds we bear. And so, the divine is not lost. It is waiting. Inside you. Varsyalan Part 5. Wholeness as Salvation. In the end, Jung came to a profound conclusion, one that fuses the psychological with the spiritual, the personal with the eternal. The quest for God is the quest for the self. Not the small self of ego, status, or surface identity, but the deep self that lies beneath the masks, beneath the conditioning, beneath the fear. This self is not found by climbing ladders of success. It is found by descending into the depths. By facing the parts of yourself you'd rather avoid. By turning toward the darkness not to be consumed by it, but to integrate it. To Jung, wholeness was salvation. Not perfection. Not purity. Wholeness, to be whole is to carry light and shadow together in harmony. To embrace both your strength and your vulnerability. To reconcile your inner contradictions, not by eliminating them, but by honoring their tension. This process, Jung called it individuation, is not a straight path. It is not quick, and it is not easy. It is not the shiny road of social approval, but the sacred road of the soul. In Christian terms, it is a kind of crucifixion, the death of the false self, followed by a resurrection into a fuller, freer being. In Eastern traditions, it is the breaking of illusion, the peeling away of false identities, until only the pure light of being remains. In Jungian language, it is the union of opposites, masculine and feminine, conscious and unconscious, finite and infinite. The reconciliation of the human and the divine within you. So, is God hidden in the depths of human consciousness? Jung would say, yes, absolutely, but not as a concept, not as a metaphor to decorate religious stories, not as a symbol to make us feel good. God, Jung believed, is an experience, a presence, a force that calls you beyond the version of yourself that the world applauds, toward the self you were always meant to become. God is not a sentence to be memorized. Not a belief to be argued. Not a conclusion to be proven. God is a mystery. To be entered, to be felt, to be lived. And if you dare to journey inward, through your dreams, through your heartbreaks, through your silence and stillness and struggle, you may come to sense it. The sacred voice that has always been whispering in your depths. The divine light that has never stopped shining, even in your darkest night. The grace that was never outside of you, but within you, waiting. As Jung once said, bidden or unbidden, God will be present. You do not have to earn it. You do not have to understand it. You only have to listen.